Hey, isn't it great that Josh Trank is finally back on the big screen? It's been 8 years since Chronicle, and that was a great movie, and I've been waiting for a follow up ever since. I'm glad it's here. Capone stars Tom Hardy as Al Capone, showing him in the final year of his life after being released from prison. His mind rotting from syphilis and in extreme medical debt, Capone's friends and family try making him as comfortable as possible while he suffers from severe hallucinations and memories of his past. So I wouldn't necessarily call this a horror movie, but what I found interesting is that it takes a horror-themed approach at telling the final year of Al Capone's life. That's something I didn't think I would see, and I found this intriguing. It goes in line with Josh Trank's style of blending genres. He made an impressive debut with Chronicle, which was a superhero film done in the style of a found footage movie, and it was a very stylish, visually pleasing film. After his last movie, the notoriously bad Fantastic Four, suffered from massive amounts of studio interference, it was nice to see him do a film that had more of a unique voice. He wrote, directed, and edited this. This is all him. Unfortunately, he misses the mark here. I will say, like Chronicle, this is an impressive film in terms of visuals. I appreciated that Trank went for a horror-themed approach when doing this, and it establishes that style right from the beginning. The first scene shows Capone walking down an eerie hallway. The music is tense, the color palette is dark, and there's this sense of claustrophobia. While this scene in particular just reveals he's messing around at a party, this does set the tone for what's to come. There are a fair amount of scenes that are competently made, showing Capone being haunted by visions of his past, and having to relive moments of people he knew being killed. He'll also have visions of people he knows standing right by his bed, and it's accompanied by some really gruesome imagery. It can be very uncomfortable. A lot of these involve fairly grotesque scenes of body gags that can be very polarizing. For example, one of Capone's visions is him seeing someone mutilate themselves, plus his own skin is rotting as the movie goes on. There are also scenes of him unable to control his bowels. He vomits all over himself, he spits on people. It can be gross, and it's honestly a bit too much at times. Mainly because I think Trank hones in on this stuff just a bit too much, and it feels like it doesn't have much of a purpose. And I'll get to more of that in a moment. But I'll give him credit though. In terms of actual aesthetic, Trank shows he's capable of setting a moody atmosphere and creating tension. When it comes to story though, this isn't an engaging movie. This is pretty much what the entire movie is. It's Capone suffering from these hallucinations and his family and friends trying to comfort him. They ask him if he's alright, they'll have a doctor examine him, but that's really it. Otherwise, it feels kinda aimless. There are some plot points brought up that seem interesting, but wind up going nowhere. It's mentioned early on how he may have hid $10 million, but because his memory is fading, he doesn't remember where he put it. And everyone from his family, to his associates, to the federal agents who are watching over him, initially try getting him to reveal where this money is. But he makes it clear early on he can't remember, and that's about it. Not much is done with that, nor is much else done with the subplot of the federal agents watching over Capone. We occasionally cut back and forth between Capone and these agents. They think he's secretly up to his old criminal activities. But not much time is dedicated to this subplot, and these aren't characters who are built up as people who we should care about. They kind of comment on the situation, and that's it. There's a scene later on where they directly confront Capone himself, but it isn't as suspenseful as Trank would like to think it is. It's not a moment that feels earned because there wasn't much building up to it. And that's kind of this movie's main issue overall. Outside of Capone's mind slipping, there's really not one central force driving this movie forward. It's filled with these repetitive scenes of Capone experiencing these hallucinations, lost in whatever lucid thoughts he may have left, and that's it. We're not given a reason as to why we should care about any of this though. Everything beyond these visions is treated like an afterthought, from the relationship between Capone and his wife, the rest of his family, and his friends. Everyone who isn't him is essentially reduced to this thankless role of checking in on him, trying to be supportive, and nothing more. And there are some fairly big names in the supporting cast. Linda Cardellini plays his wife, Matt Dillon plays a friend, Kyle Machlachlan plays his primary doctor. But beyond Cardellini, briefly, we don't see how any of this affects the relationship between Capone and his loved ones. We don't get a look at how bearing the burden of his deteriorating state affects them. It's a noble idea, and I get what Trank was going for. And I don't mind seeing a movie based around a character's mental state. I find it fascinating, especially since things like mental illness and dementia can be really sad things, and they can not only just ruin the individual who's suffering, but everyone else around them. And those are great themes to explore. But a great theme is not enough. You still need some sort of focus and a cohesive narrative so you can keep the audience interested. There needs to be an actual purpose, and there didn't seem to be one here. Outside of, Capone is just a shell of his former self. And nothing more. We just bounce around all over the place with no sense of direction. Maybe it felt scattershot as a way of reflecting Capone's mental state, and I get it, that's cool. You want to have the audience experience things just as the protagonist does. But this movie cycles through so many thoughts without following through on most of them. And this can lead to audiences being confused, and if that happens, they're not going to stay invested. Personally, I had a very difficult time by the hour mark wanting to continue with this. I was lost by the halfway point. On top of all this is Al Capone we're talking about here. This is our protagonist, not a family member who sees him differently than how the public knew him or anything like that. Him. And he's a horrible person, and that's something we're well aware of walking into this. Yet this movie doesn't make a strong case as to why we should have any sympathy for him. I get that this is supposed to be a guy who's a shell of his former self, but it's not like the movie's trying to make the case that Capone's looking back on his life of crime with regret, or even that he truly cared about others beside his wife. I mean, yeah, we're inclined to feel bad if someone whose mind was once there isn't acting the way they used to, but we're talking about an unsympathetic real-life figure here. And this movie doesn't do anything to make the case as to why we should care. Al Capone, as portrayed in this movie, is a one-note character, and honestly, I couldn't care less what happened to him here. I'd also like to talk about the one element that I've avoided for this entire review, and that's Tom Hardy. I don't know if I'd consider myself a die-hard Tom Hardy fan, but I do enjoy his work, and I really respect him as a method actor. He tries here. He really does. This just does not work. He has this mumbling way of speaking that is to the point of incoherent. I almost thought of the Coen brothers remake of True Grit when watching this, and how no one could understand what Jeff Bridges was saying at times. That's the same vibe I got here. I specifically needed to watch this with subtitles on in order to understand what he was saying. And what's funny is, when I did figure out what he was saying, it wasn't anything worth noting. It's all just him forgetting how old he is, where he hid his money, things like that. I barely remember anything that was said. The dialogue was not memorable at all. And his delivery is just so silly that it's hard to take him seriously. And if you can't take your protagonist seriously, it's hard to have a compelling movie. It seemed like he got really into it. His body language at least properly conveyed a guy who's broken down and on his last lifeline. But the way he speaks is just ridiculous. I know he's an actor who gets incredibly invested in what he does, and I really respect him for trying. This was just too distracting to enjoy. This movie is a mess. And I think that was the point to a certain degree, so in that regard, Josh Trank succeeded. Like showing this man's deteriorating mental state and how his thought process is now all over the place. But it just doesn't work here. While I like the horror-themed aesthetic, it doesn't have a cohesive story, the subplots go nowhere, plus you have a protagonist who's never made to be a likable person, on top of a noble but very misguided performance from Tom Hardy. I found myself disappointed with this one. Capone gets a 4.5 out of 10. Like just about any movie these days, it's on VOD now if you wish to check it out, but my advice, don't even bother. Tom Hardy has plenty of great movies to choose from, just go watch one of those instead. So let me know, did you see Capone, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like how the story was presented? Did you enjoy Tom Hardy's performance? And what's one of your favorite biopics, if you have one? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, if you like what you see, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you next time.